How to write a conclusion paragraph for a history paper. Restate your thesis claim. Restate your thesis claim, preferably in alternate wording. It usually makes sense to lead your conclusion paragraph with the thesis restatement. Your reader will immediately clue into the fact that you're concluding, and you won't have to write every teacher's most irrationally hated phrase, in conclusion. Basically, as soon as you hit the restatement of the thesis, your reader is going to be like, oh, they're back to this again, so obviously we must be concluding. So that allows you to just kind of move seamlessly back into your conclusion. And you're restating your thesis so your reader knows, here's what was supposed to be proved. So that's the whole point of your essay. So you're bringing that back to their mind. However, interestingly, it's often the case that in writing the essay, you will have changed or refined your thesis as you refined your thinking by writing. If you come up with a better thesis at the end of the writing process, remember to go put a version of the improved thesis into the intro paragraph where it is most needed. And make sure your intro thesis and conclusion thesis match. Really often when I'm grading papers, students will actually change their mind over the course of the paper and they won't bother, because it's a one draft kind of deal, to actually go back and make sure that the two thesis statements they have, the one in the intro and the one in the conclusion, are the same. And that makes for, obviously it's not good thinking. But very importantly, like as you write, usually you'll come up with a better thesis statement, which is natural. So just make sure you go back to your intro and put a version of that best version of the thesis out in the intro, because that's where it's supposed to be, because that way your reader knows what it is you're going to prove. Because, a paper isn't a one-off. Summarize the main point your essay covered. This is what you do after you've restated your thesis. Much as you did with your roadmap of main points in the intro paragraph, the conclusion paragraph reminds the reader what main points the essay made. So you need to assume your reader's a little bit forgetful and you're going to tell them now, oh, here's the stuff I used to prove that thesis I just restated for you. So review your various paragraph conclusion sentences to make sure you summarize everything you proved in the essay. So if you wrote good paragraph conclusion sentences, you can kind of just look at those sentences and be like, oh yeah, this is stuff I got to remind my reader that I used as proof of my main claim or thesis. And avoid putting evidence in the conclusion paragraph. A lot of times writers will be like, oh, hey, I forgot to add this evidence, and it's really important. But that should have been in a body paragraph. Evidence doesn't go in the conclusion paragraph. The conclusion is a summary of your points, and it's a restatement. It's not the place for evidence. So any new evidence, that you got to go rewrite one body paragraph and include that somewhere. The conclusion paragraph is also where you get to be all philosophical and analytical. You've proved that you are an expert your reader can trust. It's the whole point of the essay. So now you get to wrap it up like the know-it-all you are. Enjoy. This is where you get to make big, grand, sweeping claims and all that business, because you've shown the reader that you have the evidence, your points are accurate, so now you get to say what it all adds up to. So this is your moment to shine, so enjoy it. And then the last sentence or two is the going beyond idea. It's kind of like the hook, except the reverse of the hook. So it's always a little tricky to figure out like what is literally the last sentence. And like any, song or piece of art, you always want to end with like a little stinger there that the reader's going to take away and be like, wow, that was impressive. And there's three main easy ways to take leave of your reader or to wrap your essay up with style. First one, you can explain how the essay you just wrote sheds light on some larger issue or on the history of the time, place, people, etc. you just described. So that's why it's kind of going beyond. So, the French Revolution is an example of the larger set of revolutions that occurred throughout the world during this period. So you kind of are going beyond and showing that this essay you just wrote is not just important about the topic, but also about a larger sense of the topic. The other thing you can do is you can raise some new question that's related to the one you just answered. For example, if you just explained how Kenya became independent, you could then ask if this would be a model for other nations, or if Kenya's hopes for a brighter future would be rewarded. So it's almost like you're like throwing a question back at the reader or at the person who wrote the essay, saying like, this was a cool question and I answered it, but it raised this other question. And so your reader will walk away thinking like, well, that's a sophisticated writer. The other thing you can do, and this is really stylish, is to come back to your hook. So like if you had some really kind of fancy hook that like was very tempting to making your reader want to read the paper, if you can somehow come back to that, like some other version of it, or just, I don't know, bring it back. It's kind of poetic, or if you think of like music, you set something out and then you come back to that same little piece of music at the end and your reader's like, ooh, nicely done. Obviously the first one's probably the easiest of those three that are there. The question one's also pretty easy. The hook one, you got to be stylish for that. So that's what you're kind of aiming for and when at the end of your life, maybe as you become a great writer. And then do avoid ending with phrases such as, I hope you have learned, because that's way too middle school. And, thank you, because, your reader's reading the paper. You don't need to thank them. They're reading it for a reason. And it just sounds a little weird to start talking to your reader. So just don't do it. And the one that I really hate, and I get weirdly often, is high school students kind of taking themselves down at the end, where you're like, but I'm just a high school student, or I don't really know anything. Like, don't do that. Like, you wrote a paper, you have evidence, you're believable for a reason. Yeah, you're not a college professor, but like, you're not dumb. Like, and you proved your point. So don't degrade yourself at the end of the essay. You end with something stylish and you walk away, and that'll be impressive, and you earned it. If you wrote a good paper, you get to have a good hook, or a good, reverse hook. You get to have a good going beyond sentence at the end.